During the first week of my retirement, my daughter said to me, "We don't need another mouth to feed in this house," and found me a job as a hotel cleaner. I smiled and agreed, hiding my cold anger behind a mask of resignation. But when I didn't show up for work, she realized something, namely that she had underestimated me and now her life would never be the same again. I have wonderful news. Today was my last day at work. Finally retired. The coffee cup slipped from Alexia's hand, shattering against the kitchen tiles. Her husband David's newspaper crumpled in his grip as he stared at me over his reading glasses. I beamed at them both, expecting congratulations, maybe even a small celebration with the bottle of champagne we'd been saving. Instead, silence stretched across our cramped apartment kitchen like a funeral shroud. Alexia recovered first, her face flushing an angry red. "What? Mom, you can't just quit your job like that. Did you even think about what this means for us?" "Of course I did," I said, my smile beginning to waver. 38 years of service, sweetheart. I've earned this. I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate?" David's voice cut through the air like a rusty blade. He folded his newspaper with deliberate precision. "Alexia, your mother thinks we're going to support her for free." The warmth in my chest began to crystallize into something harder, colder. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment during my final elevator ride home. I'd pictured Alexia hugging me, telling me how proud she was of her hard-working mother. Instead, my daughter's face twisted with something I'd never seen directed at me before. Pure resentment. "Listen, Mom," Alexia leaned forward, her business voice replacing any trace of daughterly affection. "I'm not keeping an extra mouth to feed. You need a job by Monday. I don't care if it's scrubbing toilets or washing dishes, but you're not sitting around here living off our income." Each word struck me like a physical blow. I stared at this woman I'd raised alone, whose college education I'd worked double shifts to fund, whose wedding I'd depleted my savings to make perfect. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across her features, making her look like a stranger. David nodded approvingly. "Helena, you're 62, not 92. Plenty of people your age work. My colleague's mother cleans hotel rooms until she's 74. "But I thought," I began. "You thought wrong," Alexia interrupted. "You think money grows on trees? Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this apartment? To keep you fed and housed? I work 60 hours a week at Morrison & Associates just to keep us afloat." The irony wasn't lost on me, though neither of them would understand it. Not yet. My untouched dinner grew cold as I absorbed their words. The chicken parmesan Alexia had made, my favorite, now looked unappetizing under the fluorescent light. Everything about this moment felt wrong, distorted, like viewing my life through a carnival mirror. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I should have discussed it with you first." Alexia's expression softened slightly, perhaps hearing defeat in my tone. "Look, Mom, I'm not trying to be cruel, but reality is reality. We can't afford a freeloader." Freeloader. That word buzzed in my head as I nodded, playing the role of the chastised mother. "I'll think about your words," I said. "Good." David gathered the plates with brisk efficiency. "The sooner the better." They disappeared into the living room, leaving me alone at the kitchen table. I could hear the television spring to life, their voices returning to normal conversational tones, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered 38 years of dreams in 10 minutes. I remained seated, staring at the empty chairs where my family had been moments before. The apartment settled around me with creaks and sighs, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Normal sounds of a normal evening that felt anything but normal. Slowly I stood and began clearing the remaining dishes, my hands moving automatically while my mind processed what had just occurred. They saw me as a burden. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, they viewed their mother as nothing more than an unwanted expense. I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward my small bedroom at the back of the apartment, leaving Alexia and David to their evening entertainment. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, but tonight I needed to think. I lay fully clothed on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing cars painted moving patterns. The apartment had settled into evening quiet, but my mind churned. With the dinner conversation. 38 years of faithful service, and this was my reward, being called a freeloader by my own daughter. The bedroom was small, furnished with just the basics, a single bed, one nightstand, and a dresser that had seen better decades. Family photos lined the dresser top. Alexia's graduation, her wedding, holidays where we all looked happy. Had that been an illusion? Voices drifted through the thin wall separating my room from the master bedroom. At first, just murmurs, but gradually growing louder as Alexia and David settled into their nightly routine. "Can't believe she just announced it like that," Alexia was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the drywall. I turned toward the wall, suddenly alert. They were talking about me. "She thinks she can just sit at home on our dime," Alexia's voice rose, apparently not concerned about being overheard. 38 years of work. So what? That doesn't entitle her to retirement on our salary. David's response came through muffled, but distinct. What if she refuses to work? What if she just sits around watching her soap operas all day? Then we'll take her pension and put her in one of those state facilities. I'm done supporting dead weight. The words hit me like ice water. State facility. Dead weight. I gripped the bedsheet, my knuckles white in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "She's been mooching off us for 3 years since Dad died," David continued. "Free meals, free rent, and now she doesn't even want to work. She's got some nerve." Mooching. I closed my eyes, remembering the checks I had written. $26,000 for Alexia's college education. $12,000 for her wedding. They didn't even mention that they were living in my apartment, the one I'd been paying the mortgage on for 15 years. "The old woman doesn't realize how expensive everything is now," Alexia said. "Utilities, groceries, insurance. She thinks it's still 2005. Maybe we should give her a deadline." "Perfect idea," David suggested. 1 week to find work or she's out. And if she complains, we'll remind her that beggars can't be choosers. Their laughter drifted through the wall, casual and cruel. I lay there absorbing every word, every dismissive chuckle, every casual reference to my uselessness. These were the people I'd sacrificed for, the family I'd loved unconditionally. The apartment grew quiet again as they prepared for sleep. I remained motionless, processing this new reality. My daughter, the girl I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose fears I'd soothed, viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient expense. State facility. The phrase repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. They'd already planned my exile, already decided my fate. Take my pension, the modest monthly check that represented nearly 4 decades of labor, and warehouse me with other discarded parents. I thought about my colleagues who'd received retirement parties and gold watches. Patricia Miller got a cruise from her family. Robert's children threw him a surprise celebration at the country club. I got threats and ultimatums over chicken parmesan. But as I lay there in the darkness, something else began to stir beneath the hurt and shock. A cold, calculating anger that surprised me with its intensity. They wanted to play games with their mother's future. They wanted to treat Helena Martinez like some helpless old fool. Perhaps it was time they learned exactly who Helena Martinez really was. I closed my eyes and began to plan. Sleep did not come. I lay motionless in the darkness, listening to the apartment settling down around me while all the sacrifices replayed in my head. The silence now seemed different, not peaceful, but heavy with unspoken truth. 38 years. I worked hard, saving every penny I could spare for Alexia's future. Double shifts at the accounting firm when she needed books for school, weekend jobs when her college bills arrived. All those years of eating ramen noodles while my paycheck went toward her education at Portland State University. I remembered the night she called home, panicked about tuition increases. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I told her, already calculating how many extra hours I'd need to work. "Your mother will figure it out." And I did, trading sleep for her dreams, my comfort for her opportunities. Her wedding day flashed through my memory. Alexia in her white dress, David beaming in his rented tuxedo. Both of them blissfully unaware that their budget wedding had quietly doubled in cost. I'd covered the difference without a word, watching them dance to music I'd paid for, eating cake I'd financed, celebrating love I'd made possible. Throughout it all, I'd lived modestly, not from poverty, but from choice. Let them think I struggled paycheck to paycheck, while my real investments grew quietly in accounts they never knew existed. Better to be seen as generous than wealthy, or so I'd believed. My fingers traced the worn bedsheet as I thought about my old client, Richard Bloomberg. 22 years ago, when his small real estate company was just starting, I'd believed in his vision. $300,000 of investment capital, disguised as a loan to avoid complications. We'd shaken hands in his cramped office, two professionals betting on the future. Bloomberg Properties now owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Portland. Alexia worked for a law firm that rented space in a building her mother had helped finance, never knowing her paychecks were partially funded by the woman she now called dead weight. The photo on my nightstand caught a sliver of streetlight. Alexia at 10 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the bicycle I'd saved 3 months to buy. That girl had grown into a woman who would steal her mother's pension and abandon her to strangers. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She saw weakness where there was only kindness, mistook generosity for desperation, assumed her mother's modest lifestyle meant her mother was powerless. Tomorrow I would surprise them all by agreeing to work. Let them think they'd won. Let them feel superior, while I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the best revenge required patience, and I'd spent 62 years learning how to wait for the right moment. The clock now read 2:17 a.m. In 5 hours, I would begin teaching my daughter the difference between charity and vulnerability. She wanted to see her mother humbled. She'd get her wish. Right up until the moment she realized who was really holding the cards. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and finally allowed myself to sleep. Morning would bring new possibilities, and I intended to be well rested for what came next. Morning coffee was already brewing when I entered the kitchen. Alexia stood by the counter in her weekend clothes, while David buttered toast at the table. Both looked up as I appeared, their expressions mixing curiosity with residual hostility from last night's conversation. "Alexia, I've been thinking about your words," I said, settling into my usual chair. "You're right." The coffee mug froze halfway to Alexia's lips. David's knife stopped mid-spread, leaving a glob of butter suspended over his toast. They'd clearly expected another argument, more pleading about my retirement dreams. "Seriously?" Alexia set down her mug with obvious suspicion. "You're not going to fight us on this? What would be the point?" I kept my voice steady, reasonable. A woman my age should contribute to the household. "I see that now." David exchanged glances with his wife, probably wondering if this was some kind of trick. They'd prepared for battle and found surrender instead. Alexia leaned against the counter, her management persona emerging. "Well, since you're being practical about this, I might have a solution. There's a cleaning position open at the Grandview Hotel downtown. I know the assistant manager from college." I felt a small smile threaten the corners of my mouth and quickly suppressed it. "That sounds perfect. I accept." Just like that. David's voice carried notes of disbelief and satisfaction. "You're willing to clean hotel rooms?" "Honest work is honest work," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "When would I start?" Alexia's chest puffed slightly with newfound authority. "Monday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. You'd be perfect for the position. Reliable, follows orders, grateful for the opportunity." She paused, savoring her next words. "The pay is minimum wage, of course. But beggars can't be choosers, right?" There it was again, that phrase they'd laughed about through the thin walls. I nodded seriously, as if accepting both the job and the insult with equal grace. "I'll need to call my friend Carmen about approving the hire," Alexia continued. "But I'm sure she'll understand the family situation. Probably feel sorry for you, actually." Carmen Rodriguez, my old client whose hotel empire I'd helped finance through strategic property investments 15 years ago. "That's very kind of you to help arrange this," I said, letting just enough gratitude creep into my voice to make them feel magnanimous. David reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. "See, this wasn't so difficult. You just needed to face reality about your situation." "My situation?" If only he knew. "I appreciate you both helping me understand," I said. "It'll be good to have purpose again, to contribute something meaningful to the family income." Alexia nodded approvingly. "Exactly the attitude we wanted to see. Maybe this will work out after all." She pulled out her phone, presumably to contact Carmen about the cleaning position. I watched her dial, imagining Carmen's reaction when she received this particular request. "I'll make the call this afternoon," Alexia said. "Get everything set up for Monday." Perfect, I replied, already picturing my first day back at the Grandview Hotel. It would indeed be a homecoming, just not the kind Alexia anticipated. The conversation moved on to weekend plans and grocery lists, but I barely listened. My mind was already planning Monday morning, calculating exactly how long it would take for the truth to emerge. Very soon they'd learn that underestimating Helena Martinez was the costliest mistake they'd ever made. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. The weekend between my agreement and today had passed in a blur of Alexia's smug preparations. She'd proudly informed Carmen about solving her mother problem, purchased cleaning supplies for me, and outlined my duties with barely concealed satisfaction. I'd played along perfectly, nodding appreciatively while internally counting down to this moment. At 7:30 a.m., I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. Through the window, I could see neighbors heading to work, their routines unchanged by the small revolution brewing in my apartment. The cleaning supplies Alexia had bought remained untouched in their bag by the door, a prop in the theater of her expectations. My phone remained silent until 8:45. Then it erupted. "Mom, where are you?" Alexia's voice crackled with fury and panic. "Carmen just tore me apart. She was waiting for the new cleaning lady, and nobody showed up." "Oh my," I said, affecting just the right tone of confused concern. "What time was I supposed to be there?" 6 a.m. "We discussed this every day this weekend. How could you forget?" I paused, letting her agitation build before responding with carefully measured bewilderment. "I'm so sorry, Alexia. Age, sometimes things just slip away from me. These old brains aren't what they used to be." "This isn't about your brain." Her voice rose another octave. "I vouched for you. I told Carmen you'd be reliable. That hiring family was a smart move. Now I look like a complete fool." "Perfect." I imagined Carmen's confusion, probably wondering why Alexia was so invested in hiring an elderly cleaning lady. "I feel terrible about this misunderstanding," I continued, maintaining my performance of elderly confusion. "What did Ms. Rodriguez say?" "She asked why I was so personally involved in the hiring process. I had to explain you were my mother living at home who needed the work." Alexia's voice carried the bitter taste of professional embarrassment. The whole conversation was humiliating. Interesting. Carmen hadn't revealed our connection, maintaining her discretion even when presented with this strange situation. She was probably trying to puzzle out why Helena Martinez's daughter was offering Helena Martinez a menial job at Helena Martinez's own investment property. "Perhaps I could come in this afternoon," I suggested helpfully. "Make up for lost time." "No. Tomorrow you will be at work at 5:45 a.m. sharp. Or else," she trailed off, probably remembering she was speaking to her supposedly forgetful mother. "Just don't let this happen again, Mom. My reputation is on the line." "Of course, sweetheart. I understand completely." After she hung up, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of deep satisfaction. Phase 1 had worked perfectly. Alexia was rattled, embarrassed before her college friend, questioning her mother's reliability. The careful authority she'd built around this arrangement was already cracking. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, and I had several hours to prepare the next surprise. But for now, I'd accomplished exactly what I'd intended. I'd reminded Alexia that even when she thought she held all the cards, her mother could still find ways to disrupt the game. I folded the newspaper and headed toward my computer. Phase 3 would require more preparation, but the foundation was already laid. With Alexia's angry phone call still echoing in my mind, I moved to the small desk in my bedroom, where 2 manila folders waited. I'd been preparing this particular surprise for 3 months, ever since the evening I discovered David's secret. It had been a February afternoon when I'd noticed Hartley and Associates letterheads scattered across the kitchen counter. David had been careless, leaving work documents beside his coffee cup while he answered a phone call. My trained eye, 38 years of reviewing financial statements, immediately caught the irregularities in the expense reports. Office equipment, $1,247. Computer maintenance, $2,134. The numbers seemed inflated for a mid-sized insurance company. I'd managed budgets for decades. These figures raised immediate red flags. Interesting, I'd murmured to myself that day, carefully photographing the documents with my phone while David chatted in the next room. Why does David have work documents at home? And why do these numbers look so odd? That evening, I'd called my old colleague Patricia Williams, a forensic accountant who owed me several favors from our professional days. Patricia, could you check something for me at Hartley and Associates? I'd asked casually. Completely confidential, of course. I'm curious about their actual office equipment expenses over the past 6 months. Four days later, Patricia had discreetly provided me with the real expense reports. The comparison was damning. David had been systematically inflating costs and pocketing the difference. Office equipment that cost $547 became $1,247 on his reports. A $734 maintenance bill became $2,134. 8 months of careful theft hidden behind falsified receipts and altered invoices. Now sitting at my computer, I opened both folders side by side. The evidence was irrefutable. David's falsified documents photographed from our kitchen table alongside the authentic records Patricia had obtained. The pattern was clear, systematic, and entirely criminal. I began typing the anonymous email. Dear Mr. Hartley, I am writing to inform you of serious financial irregularities in your company's expense reporting. Your employee, David Chun, has been systematically embezzling funds through falsified office equipment and maintenance expenses. Please find attached documented evidence comparing reported expenses with actual vendor receipts. The pattern spans several months and represents substantial theft from your company. I recommend immediate investigation and audit of all expense reports submitted by Mr. Chun, a concerned party. I attached the scanned evidence files, double-checked the anonymous email account I'd created specifically for this purpose, and hovered my finger over the send button. For a moment, I considered the consequences. David would likely be fired, possibly prosecuted. Alexia would face the stress of an unemployed husband under criminal investigation. Their financial stability would crumble. Then I remembered their laughter through the thin walls, their casual planning of my exile to a state facility, their complete dismissal of the woman who'd funded their entire comfortable existence. I clicked send. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it the destruction of David's career and Alexia's peace of mind. Within hours, possibly by this afternoon, their world would begin unraveling from a direction they'd never anticipated. I closed the laptop and gathered the physical documents, feeding them into my small paper shredder. The evidence had served its purpose. Now it needed to disappear completely. Outside, spring afternoon sunshine painted the kitchen in golden light. I made myself a sandwich and sat down to wait. Soon enough, the consequences would unfold. Alexia had wanted to play games with her mother's future. Now she'd discover that her mother had been collecting insurance policies all along. The front door slammed at 4:17 p.m., followed by the sound of heels clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor. I looked up from my evening crossword puzzle, feigning surprise at the urgency in Alexia's footsteps. She appeared in the living room doorway, her face blotchy with tears. Mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, blouse wrinkled, hair escaping its neat bun, hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Alexia, what happened? I set down the puzzle book, rising halfway from my chair with practiced concern. Why are you crying? David's been fired, the words tumbled out between gasping sobs. Someone sent his boss documents. Financial records. They think he's been stealing. What terrible luck. I moved toward her, my voice carefully calibrated to convey shock and sympathy. Who could have done such a thing? She collapsed into the armchair across from me, her composure completely shattered. I don't know. Someone anonymous sent detailed evidence to Mr. Hartley this afternoon. Bank records, expense reports, everything laid out like some kind of forensic investigation. I settled back into my seat, maintaining my expression of bewildered concern while internally cataloging every detail she revealed. That sounds absolutely devastating. What exactly are they claiming? They're saying he inflated expense reports, created fake invoices, used the company credit card for personal purchases. Her voice broke completely. Mom, they have everything. Dates, amounts, even photographs of documents. Fascinating. Hartley had moved quickly, confronting David within hours of receiving my email. A competent businessman, clearly the kind who understood that embezzlement required immediate action. But surely this is some kind of misunderstanding, I said gently. You know David is an honest person. Anyone who knows him would vouch for his character. That's just it, she leaned forward desperately. The evidence is so detailed, so specific. Whoever did this has been watching him for months, documenting everything. It's like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Indeed, they did. Have you told him you know? I asked, allowing appropriate worry to creep into my voice. Her face crumpled further. He just called from the office. Security escorted him out. He's devastated, Mom. What are we going to do? If there are criminal charges, if they prosecute him, we'll lose everything. Now I moved to pat her shoulder in a motherly gesture. We'll figure this out together. Family supports family, right? The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd laughed about sending me to a state facility was now seeking comfort from the very person she'd planned to abandon. They've suspended him pending a full investigation, she continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. Mr. Hartley said the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They're bringing in external auditors, reviewing every transaction he's handled in the past year. External auditors. Patricia Williams had certainly covered her tracks well when she'd helped me gather the initial evidence. The authentic expense reports she'd provided would perfectly corroborate my anonymous allegations. Is there any chance this could be resolved quietly? I asked, maintaining my helpful tone. Perhaps if David spoke with Mr. Hartley directly, explained his side of things? His side. She laughed bitterly. What side? The documents don't lie, Mom. Someone has built an airtight case against him, and we have no idea who or why. The sound of David's car pulling into the parking lot cut through her despair. We both heard his footsteps on the stairs, his key turning in the lock. Please, Alexia whispered urgently. Let me tell him I talked to you. He's going to be humiliated enough. I nodded sympathetically, settling back to enjoy the evening's final act as David's voice called out from the entryway. Alexia? Helena? I'm home. David's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, each thud carrying the weight of his catastrophic day. When he appeared in the living room doorway, his tie was loosened and his shirt wrinkled. His expression immediately shifted from tired despair to sharp alarm at the scene before him. What's wrong? He dropped his briefcase and rushed toward Alexia, who was still dabbing at her tear-streaked face. Why are you crying? I told her about what happened, Alexia said quietly, accepting his embrace. David's shoulders sagged as he sank into the chair beside his wife. For a moment, he looked older than his 34 years, the weight of unemployment and potential criminal charges aging him before my eyes. I don't understand it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Someone had access to everything. Internal documents, bank records, vendor receipts. They knew exactly what to look for and exactly who to send it to. I maintained my expression of confused sympathy. This must be some kind of mistake, David. You're not the type of person who would steal. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. That's what I tried to tell Mr. Hartley, but the evidence is overwhelming. Whoever did this spent months building a case against me. It's like they were inside my head, documenting every transaction. What will you do now? I asked gently. I don't know. David's voice cracked. Hartley said they're considering criminal charges. Even if they don't prosecute, my career in insurance is over. Who's going to hire someone accused of embezzlement? Alexia reached for his hand. We'll figure something out. Maybe you could start your own consulting business. With what money? David's laugh was bitter. We live paycheck to paycheck as it is. Without my salary, we can't even afford this apartment. The apartment I'd been paying the mortgage on for 15 years, though they'd conveniently forgotten that detail. Perhaps I could help, I said quietly. Once I start working at the hotel, my wages could contribute to household expenses. Both of them turned to stare at me, clearly having forgotten about my employment situation in the wake of David's crisis. Mom, Alexia said slowly, about that job. After what happened this morning, I don't know if Carmen will give you another chance. What happened this morning? David asked, momentarily distracted from his own problems. I was late for my first day, I explained, maintaining my elderly confusion act. These old brains, you know. Sometimes details just slip away. David's face darkened. So now we have no income at all? I'm unemployed, and Helena can't even show up for a minimum wage job. David, please, Alexia said, but I could see the panic building in her eyes. Her husband was unemployed and facing criminal charges, her mother was proving unreliable as a worker, and their financial security was crumbling around them. This is exactly what I was afraid of, David continued, his voice rising. We're supporting deadweight while our own lives fall apart. There was that phrase again. Dead weight. Maybe, I said carefully, it's time we discussed some alternative arrangements. Both of them looked at me with sudden attention. What do you mean? Alexia asked. Well, I said, allowing uncertainty to color my voice, if I'm such a burden, and if money is so tight, perhaps you'd be better off without me. There are places for people like me. Senior communities, assisted living facilities. The relief that flashed across both their faces was unmistakable, quickly followed by artificial concern. Mom, we don't want to put you in a home, Alexia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. No, I insisted, playing my role perfectly. I've been thinking about it since our dinner conversation. You're young, you have your own lives to live. You shouldn't be burdened with an old woman who can't even remember to show up for work. David leaned forward, suddenly interested. There are some very nice facilities in the area. Comfortable, with good care. And it would free up your bedroom, I continued helpfully. You could use the space for a home office, especially if David starts consulting. The enthusiasm in their eyes was almost comical. They were practically salivating at the prospect of getting rid of me while taking over my apartment entirely. We could look into some options, Alexia said carefully. Just to see what's available. That would be wonderful, I replied. And of course, my pension and social security could help pay for the facility. We wouldn't want to burden you with those expenses. The hook was set. They thought they were getting exactly what they wanted, my apartment, my income, and freedom from the obligation of caring for their elderly mother. Why don't you two research some facilities this weekend? I suggested. I'll prepare my financial information so we can see what's affordable. As they began discussing nursing homes with barely concealed excitement, I sat back and smiled. Phase 4 was already in motion. Soon they would discover that their financially dependent mother had been playing a much longer game than they'd ever imagined. But that revelation would have to wait until they'd committed fully to their plan. Sometimes the best lessons required complete investment in the mistake. The weekend passed in a blur of nursing home brochures and barely contained excitement from Alexia and David. They'd researched facilities with the enthusiasm of people planning a vacation, discussing amenities and costs while I played the role of the cooperative elderly mother, grateful for their help in planning my exile. Monday morning arrived with a different energy in the apartment. I could hear them whispering in the kitchen, their voices carrying notes of anticipation mixed with nervous guilt. I dressed slowly, taking my time with the morning routine they expected from someone my age. When I finally appeared in the kitchen, they were sitting at the table with a manila folder between them, their expressions mixing artificial concern with barely concealed relief. Mom, Alexia began carefully, we found some wonderful options for senior living. Places where you'd be much happier than cramped in here with us. I settled into my chair, affecting the slightly confused but trusting expression they expected. Oh, how thoughtful of you both. David opened the folder, revealing glossy brochures for 3 different facilities. We visited them all this weekend. This one, he pointed to a brochure showing a modest building surrounded by small gardens, seems perfect for your budget. Sunset Manor. I recognized the name from my own research months ago. A state-subsidized facility with a reputation for warehousing elderly residents with minimal family involvement. It looks lovely, I said, studying the carefully composed photographs that managed to make institutional living look almost homey. How much would it cost? Alexia exchanged glances with David before answering. Well, they have a program for people on fixed incomes. Your pension and social security would cover most of the expenses. Most. I caught the careful phrasing. They'd obviously calculated exactly how much of my income would be left over for their own use. There's just one small administrative detail, David continued. To qualify for the subsidized rate, they need someone to act as your financial power of attorney. You know, to handle the paperwork and payments. Financial power of attorney. The final piece of their plan, spoken with such casual innocence that someone truly elderly and confused might not catch the implications. That makes sense, I said, nodding as if this were perfectly reasonable. I wouldn't want to burden myself with all those complicated forms. The relief on their faces was almost comical. They thought they'd successfully maneuvered their inconvenient mother into signing over control of her finances while paying for her own exile. We could take care of everything, Alexia said, her voice warm with false affection. Make sure all your bills are paid, handle your banking, ensure you're comfortable. You're both so good to me, I replied, letting gratitude fill my voice. When would I move? Well, David said, consulting his notes, they have an opening this Friday. We thought, if you're comfortable with it, we could move you in this weekend. This Friday. Less than a week to complete their plan. They'd clearly been more thorough in their scheming than I'd given them credit for. That seems very efficient, I said. Should I start packing my things? Don't worry about too much, Alexia said quickly. The rooms are small, and they provide most of what you'll need. Just personal items, photographs, a few changes of clothes. Personal items. They'd already decided what of my life was worth keeping. There is one more thing, I said, as if suddenly remembering. I should probably organize my important papers. Bank statements, investment records, that sort of thing. Make sure everything is in order for the power of